All right, is this on the right screen now?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Clark. I'm a speech pathologist with the Minot Infant Development Program out of Minot, North Dakota. I've been working with MIDP since June 2019, but have also had previous experience with the adult population in central Louisiana, as well as school-age children in central Wisconsin. All right, so by the end of this presentation, you should be able to explain the importance of functional communication, identify language versus functional communication, and review appropriate development of language in toddlers. Okay, language development. So I feel like language is kind of one of those things that is not as well known, the development. So around 12 months is when we usually start seeing those first words, but we don't really know what we're supposed to be seeing in regards to their understanding. So by 12 to 15 months, children should be following some simple commands and starting to point to familiar pictures in books. By 18 months, we want children to use at least 10 words. They may not always be recognizable. Oh, I'm so sorry. If you can hear that, that's my dog. They may not always, these words may not always be recognizable, but that's okay. They don't really need to be at 18 months. As well as some simple questioning. In regards to their understanding by 18 months, they should be following some more directions, understanding some simple questions, and answering some simple questions as well. By 24 months, we want children to be using at least 50 words, using some two-word phrases, imitating many words, and asking some more questions. Receptively, they should be understanding. They should be understanding 200 to 600 words, following more specific directions, and understanding a variety of question types. By 36 months, children should be using close to 1,000 words, using some more three-word phrases, asking many questions. Receptively, they should be following even more directions, understanding action words, and also understanding more of those WH questions. But a lot of times, parents are asked what counts as a word. Anything that's used consistently, independently, and intentionally. So that includes word approximations, so like ba for ball, for up. I've heard like mo for remote. Sound effects, the uh-oh, we, animal sounds, and then signs and gestures. Okay, so now that we've got that development background, tell me, what do you think functional communication is? You can put it in the chat box or say it out loud if you feel comfortable. And I don't know that I can see the chat, so I might be able to.
I haven't seen anyone put anything in yet. Oh, using words to get something met. Here they all come.
Oh yeah, all at once.
Right. I was like, whoa. Using words and signs to get needs met. Anytime communication with words, gestures, or signs.
Yes, perfect. And going even a little bit further than that. Functional communication refers to the most basic of communication skills. So this type of communication gets one's basic wants and needs known, such as I want that, I'm hurt, I need to use the bathroom. They're not complex thoughts. They're often the first types of messages that children begin to communicate. For most children, functional communication begins to emerge in the first year of life with gestures. So, waving hi and bye, and then is expanded on in the following years with words, and then later simple sentences. So yeah, that's all great and dandy, but why is this important? So I know you all can read, but I'm still going to read this out loud because when I first read it the first time, I thought it was pretty powerful. So pretend you have a flat tire. If you call 911 and say black circle, they're not going to understand what you need. However, if you could say help, broken, stuck, hurt, then they would know that something is wrong. I feel like as a society, we've become very consumed in teaching colors and numbers and letters and all of those preschool readiness skills that we kind of forget about this functional communication aspect. And sometimes that might be something parents might not want to focus on because it is a little bit more frustrating. It is a little bit more discouraging and more often related to those challenging behaviors because it's the things that they need and get emotional about. I've worked with many families where the child can name all of their colors, name all their numbers, their shapes. I even had a little guy who named states and countries when on a map. They had all this language, but they weren't able to communicate those basic wants and needs. So how do we fix that? So I just want to clarify, functional communication is best addressed by a speech language pathologist. If you're working with a child who's struggling to communicate their basic wants and needs, you should seek out a certified speech language pathologist for help. But here's an overview. First, we want to find an appropriate mode of communication. So basically what's used to communicate. As adults, we use a combination of spoken speech, gestures, and body language to communicate with one another. Those are our modes of communication. Sometimes children have trouble with the spoken speech part of that, so other modes might need to be considered. So the primary focus at this point is to give them some mode of communication regardless of what it is. And I know some parents get a little hesitant when we bring up sign language or anything like that, just because, well, I want them to speak. Why are we trying to do this sign language? It's kind of a hard thing to kind of explain. So these are kind of listed in a hierarchy, easiest at the top and more sophisticated toward the bottom. A speech language pathologist will be able to determine what's most appropriate for your child. Gestures and body language. These are things like pointing, reaching, leading you to a desired item, even facial expressions. It's the most basic form of communication, and it should most definitely be acknowledged. You can say things like, I can see that you are mad, I'm so sorry you can't hit your brother, or whatever it is they might try to be communicating. Sign language, using simple signs is another great way to build communication skills. A lot of times at this age, children are more likely to imitate simple motor actions than they are sounds or words. So using sign language to kind of bridge that gap is a great way to build on that communication. Pictures and visuals is another great way. Showing a child pictures of words that you are saying can increase their comprehension or their understanding. Not only are they hearing the word, but then they're also seeing the picture associated with that verbal form of the word. And then also letting them choose what they want from pictures can be extremely helpful because it gives them a way to communicate even if they're not using some verbal words. But I will say using pictures requires the child to be able to identify pictures. So if they're not identifying pictures yet, like in books or pictures of themselves, just simple things like that, I would not recommend using pictures or visuals yet. A communication board. This is kind of, we're getting a little more sophisticated. Like I said, a simple AAC device where pictures of things the child may want to communicate are placed on a board and they have to point to the picture he or she wants. And then voice output devices. There are many devices out there like communication buttons that will help a child communicate by speaking a message when they push the button. So the device will store different words and messages so they can offer many options for the child. It's kind of like a button. They push the button for juice and they get their juice. These devices may take longer for them to learn, but they can grow to meet the child's needs as they get older. So that first step, we need to figure out the mode of communication that is most appropriate. After that, we need to choose the words that we want to teach. So choosing words is super, super important. There are many variables that determine which words we want the child to learn. Functionality, motivation, attention, etc. If the child's not communicating much yet, we want to teach only 1 or 2 concepts. Choose things that are functional, but also highly motivating, such as a favorite food, favorite toy, or a game they really enjoy. So like tickling, bouncing, swinging, stuff like that. Stuff where they're gonna be more apt to communicate with you to do versus something that they might not really care about. So then after we choose the words that we want to teach, we need to teach them. Well, how do we teach words? Don't we just learn them? So we want to model for the child as much as possible. Children need to learn words and understand what they mean before they can say them. So it's kind of like teaching something. So teaching something in class and then getting tested on it right away. That's not going to work. You need many exposures to it before you're going to be able to be tested on it. So children are able to understand much more than they can say. Understanding of language leads to spoken language. So we want to focus on providing quality input to children. So language input includes all of the words a child hears each day. It's important to talk a lot with children, but it's also important to focus on quality versus quantity. So use the word in a variety of different contexts, such as different activities or times of the day. Say the word by itself many times and then in 2-word phrases as well to show how it can be used. While you are saying the word, you should also be demonstrating the way that you are expecting the child to use the word. So for example, if you want the child to sign the word, then you should be signing the word while you say the word. Or if you have a voice output device for them to use, you should say the word yourself while also pushing the button or whatever it might be, switch on the talker. You should say and model the word many times before expecting them to say, sign, push, whatever you're expecting them to do. Children need to hear things many times to learn them, and children's language delays might take a little bit longer. So now that your child has been exposed to the word over and over and over again, you should start setting up temptations that will encourage the child to use it. So here are some examples of ways to provide opportunities to use new words. Put a highly motivating item high up on a shelf so that they can see it, but they can't reach it. Or maybe in a box that's hard for them to open. Either way, they have to communicate with you in some way to get that desired item, whether it be pointing or signing help or whatever it may be. When the child reaches or points for it, look confused and say, what? What do you want? Kind of just play dumb, like you don't really know what's going on. And you can even hold your hands up as a gesture. You know how little kids like to, what? Give them time, give them wait time to see if they will say, sign, push, point to the word that you are trying to teach. A lot of times, I like to tell people to try count to 10 in your head so you know that you've waited long enough. After you've given some wait time, model the word for the child as a question. You can give a choice. You can ask a question. So do you want the ball or just ball? Or give them a choice. Do you want the car or the ball? So when I'm giving choices, I usually put the one I know they want last. So if I know they want the ball, I will say that word last. So it's the last thing that they hear. Make sure you use the mode of communication you want them to use while you say it. So signing, pointing to the picture, whatever it may be, and then count to 10 again in your head. Wait time is perfect because it kind of makes this kind of uncomfortableness, awkwardness between the two of you. So they're like, well, do I need to do something to try to get what they want? If they still don't say or sign or push or point to the word that you're trying to teach, just go ahead and model it again and then give it to them. You don't want to cause too much frustration, but a little bit of frustration is good. Also, if they pointed or gestured, you want to acknowledge that communication. You pointed to the ball, here's the ball, as you hand it to them. Eventually, we want them to use the word on their own, but if we still need to support that skill, that's okay. So the bottom line is a focus on functional communication and meaningful participation leads to improved outcomes. However this may look, whether it be through sign language or pointing or spoken words. I do want to point out though, it's important to recognize the family's goal for their child to speak with verbal words, but it's also important to remind them that communication is more than words. I mean, a lot of us talk with our hands, we talk with our body language, facial expressions, stuff like that. That can be extremely helpful in kind of guiding that communication development through to get to the spoken words part. So I guess, in my opinion, any communication is better than no communication, but I know for parents that can be pretty difficult to understand when you're working towards speaking and you have an SOP wanting to work on sign language or buttons or something. So I think it's important to recognize that, but also important to remind them that communication is more than just words, and we will work on building to get there. There we go. Do we have any questions? Do you want me to stop sharing, Janelle?
Sure, that would be great. And we'll open it up for 5 to 10 minutes for any questions people have. So you can either—
I talk fast. I talk fast when I'm nervous, so.
I think we all do, don't we? So people can either put their questions in the chat or go ahead and just unmute yourself and.
So I have a question. I'm Tara. I'm also from North Dakota. I live in Jamestown. So awesome to see you, Shelby. So I recently had done a training through Summit that the speech that was on, I'm a physical therapist by trade. This was on speech, a speech therapist that did it. And she talked about, when you're modeling to start it here and then like do it 3 times and bring it closer each time. And then, if they don't say it by that 3rd time, then you just, you give it to them, you reward them still. What are your kind of experience with that?
I like starting right here because that brings attention to your mouth. Definitely with anything, I would definitely just try to bring that attention to your mouth. And kind of the same thing. I'll repeat it maybe 3 times. I think it depends on the child. So if they get pretty frustrated pretty easily, I'm not going to repeat it 3 times to try to get them to repeat it back to me. I'll probably do it like once and would have that wait time. But yeah, I think it definitely depends on the frustration level of the child that you're working with. If they can handle that 3 times and then the wait time in between, go for it. The more times they hear it, it's not going to hurt anything. But yeah, did that answer your question?
Just wondering, just kind of different, just wondering, your experience with that and what you had seen.
Yeah, and that's
successful.
That's usually what I do, if depending on the frustration. Sometimes kiddos just don't want to repeat, and that's just how it is.
Mm-hmm. And it was super interesting because what you're talking about with the functional pieces of, like, she went on a soapbox about the whole learning the letters and the shapes and the, the whole thing. And she's like, it's it's not functional for a, especially under 3, early intervention type. So it was really, the fact that you were seeing that same perspective. It was like, all right, really working on car noises and actions and, like you said, those words, those help, those,
Yeah.
the more and the, all done and the things like that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like, I've had parents, I'll go into an eval and I'm like, okay, tell me about the words that they use, whatever. Oh, they name all their colors, all their numbers. I'm like, okay, well, can they tell you when they're hungry? How do they tell you when they need to sleep or get a snack or something like that? And I just think that's kind of a really important, I feel like that's more important than learning their colors and numbers, but I know some parents are all about the colors and numbers and letters.
Yep. And have you seen a change with that as school standards have gotten higher? Like the fact that they, want them to come into kindergarten with a lot of those prereq things. Are you seeing anything with that?
I feel like I've seen it more recently with the colors and the numbers and all of that, but I also think it's kind of partly because of COVID and having to stay home, parents having to stay home with their kids, but not really knowing what to teach their kids, like in terms of language. So they're pushing all the stuff like that they remember learning in school, probably. You know what I mean?
That makes sense.
So that's kind of where I think that's coming from too.
There's a couple other questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to look at them, Shelby, if you want us to read them. You got it?
I got them.
Okay, perfect.
So how do you try to convince parents to work on functional communication while still celebrating successes of singing the ABCs, IDing letters, etc.? I think that's really hard just because that's great. Like singing ABCs, identifying letters, that's perfect. But it's hard because sometimes, like, when you're there in a visit, yes, we're gonna sing, they're singing the ABCs, you saw it, and then 5 minutes later they're having a meltdown because they can't tell you what toy they want, or they need help but they don't know how to ask you. So I feel like I try to convince them by kind of not really opening their eyes, but like, oh wow, if only he could say help to tell us that he needs help. Kind of just easing it in there nicely. Because yeah, I mean, singing the ABCs, identifying letters, that's great. It's just not super functional to the point where it's gonna get their needs and wants met. For the list of modes of communication, you said they're listed easiest at the top and more sophisticated towards the bottom. Why did you put pictures and visuals as more sophisticated than sign language? I did that just because to work on pictures, kiddos need to be able to identify the picture. So if they can't identify the picture of the items or whatever that you have in the board, it's a little bit more sophisticated. I wouldn't say that they're way more sophisticated than sign language. I think I did that just for the sole fact that they need to be able to identify pictures versus with sign language, they just need to imitate a movement, if that makes sense. Can you speak to motor planning challenges and rote learning? Could this be a reason colors are easier for a parent to have a child say, because blue is always blue, but a cracker can be a saltine or goldfish or Ritz? Yes, I can see where you could say from that it's easier for them to say, just because, yeah, blue is always blue and cracker can be many different kinds of crackers. But I also think it is partly just, especially with COVID, parents weren't really sure how to teach their children language, so they worked on the things that they knew best. So colors, numbers, all of those preschool readiness skills. And I mean, even with like blue and cracker, blue as a word is easier to say than cracker because that B sound is right at the beginning versus the K in cracker is produced at the back of your throat, so they can't readily see it. But yeah, that's a really good point, Michelle, about the blue is always blue, and cracker could be many different kinds of crackers or snacks in general.
Shelby, I have a question. It's Jessie. Do you think that being able to request something or to label it should come first?
I feel like they have to know the label of it before they can request it. But you
Like just to be like more versus like ball or whatever.
Right. But requesting, you can also request without a word just by pointing. If you're pointing to something to request it. I guess it depends on the goal and what you want. Do you want the child to label it verbally first, or do you want them to request it non-verbally first? Either way, I think you can work on both at the same time, but
yeah, just curious. Thanks.
Yeah. Do you think it has anything to do with children watching television and learning this way versus parents teaching? Yes and no. I think, especially with COVID again, and parents being home and trying to work from home, but also having their children home, television was a big, babysitter to try to, so everyone can get their stuff done. I think there's a way to watch television in a way that's beneficial when it's interactive. You're sitting there with them watching, kind of describing what you're seeing, and then using the television as like I said before, like a babysitter while you're trying to get work done, where there's not that interaction piece. They're just like zoned out watching it. Obviously, I would much rather have the interactive piece to it, because they're gonna learn so much more than just watching it. Either way, they're getting some kind of input, but kind of if you're able to kind of persuade parents to watch, if they're gonna have them watch television, encourage the parents to watch television with the child so that it's an interactive experience and they're talking about what they're seeing and oh, did you see that boat? It was really big, versus stuff that they might not be getting from the Brooke. I just saw your comment. I think of Coco Melon with Alicia's comment. Yeah, I agree with that. And they do focus on the ABCs and colors. Yes, yes, yeah. So if there's interaction within it, I think it's better than just, sit here and watch this while I finish working or whatever it might be, which sometimes is inevitable. It has to happen.
Have a lot of kids that don't have functional speech.
Mhm.
And when I think about it, I think those are a lot of our children that do a lot of TV watching
Mhm.
without parent involvement. And
Yeah.
maybe that's another big piece that we're missing.
Yeah.
So just another thing to try and remember to
Mhm.
teach parents is how to watch TV with their kids.
Right. Which is funny because, you wouldn't think you'd have to, like, that's not something that you think of. Like, you don't know what you don't know kind of a thing. Any other questions or comments or?
I have a question about receptive language.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I struggle when helping families with early communication to identify if it is receptive versus expressive,
Mhm.
and I know you mentioned, are they able to imitate motor actions, point to things, and answer WH questions?
Mm-hmm.
But what if there's like some of those that they're doing, but others that they're not, and how do you tease out expressive versus receptive deficit, or I don't know, difficulties?
It's hard because more so people talk about the expressive part of language more so than they do the receptive part of language, just because it's easier to explain than receptive is. So a lot of times when I think if there's a receptive delay or receptive concern, I'm looking at following some simple directions. So like, and super simple, like give me the cup, or you know what I mean? Otherwise, pointing to pictures in books. If they're not quite doing that yet, then I'm like, they might need a little help with the understanding of, maybe they're not understanding that they need to point. Maybe they're not understanding what the animal is, or the thing in the book that I want them to point at. Maybe they don't know that name of that animal, or the name of that car, or whatever it might be. Yes, so that's kind of what I look at mostly for receptive. And sometimes it's just if they're not really paying attention to you, because why am I going to pay attention to you if I'm not understanding what you're saying? So kind of, you have to build that motivation too of, oh, this is fun, this is what I want you to do, versus I'm just going to ignore you because I don't know what you're saying anyways. And then I did see a comment, also some children who lack functional language may be on the autism spectrum. Yes, I do agree with that too.
I have a comment to share about using sign and parents sitting in the background being, kind of going, we want them to talk, we want them to talk, we don't want them to use sign. And some kids, I mean, there are several different modes of learning and each child is different. And some kids have a greater capacity for kinesthetic learning. So if they learn this for toilet and they know that means help me, I need to go to the bathroom, that when they're going like this, will clue in. So when they hear that toilet word, that they're putting them together. And that's what the brain working and functioning is all about. And the other thing is, they've done some studies on people with 2 and 3 and 4 languages, and the kids start from birth, can start from birth and go to by age 3, they've got all of the rules for the languages that they have been exposed to. And they've done some studies further down the line, and they find out that this is possibly related to Alzheimer's in old age, and kids or people with more than one language have less of a chance of having Alzheimer's. And this includes people that are learning sign language. Don't know.
That's insane. That's awesome though, but that's insane.
But it's something to share with families, and just because it just goes, oh, well, then I'm really actually doing some good for my child.
Right.
And, planning for the future and helping them make the connections in their brain from, if they are possibly a kinesthetic learner, then those connections that they make in their brain start here and they move next to auditory and then to sound.
Right. And it kind of creates a little bit better buy-in for parents then, because they're like, oh, this is a good thing then. And I also want to point out, like with sign language, a lot of people are very, not a lot, I guess. I just saw a little kiddo the other day where they said that they're also receiving direct speech services in addition to early intervention. And they were working on perfecting the signs. And when I asked what that meant, she meant like for the sign help, like actually like doing the thumb up in the hand, lifting up. And I didn't say this, but I thought in my head, I said, why work on that when we could teach more words? Just because as long as you know what the word is and the child knows what the word is, I don't really care what the sign looks like. Like even for more, like it's like this. But I've had some kiddos do with just their fingers or with their wrists together, or they clap a little bit. I don't care what it looks like as long as you both know what it is. And it's a useful tool for communication. So I just want to throw that in there. It doesn't have to look perfect all the time.
Yeah, that's a great point, Shelby. I loved that one. I also loved the idea of using TV time as a way to use communication. We always think about books, but I hadn't really thought about that. So
some parents just won't do books.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm gonna try to do something that you are gonna do.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Shelby, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing functional communication with us, and hope everybody learned that, some valuable resources. I am going to ask Heather is going to be sharing our case presentation. I will start sharing my screen. Hopefully I have fixed my subtitles, and they're no longer in gibberish or Spanish or partial English. I have no idea what happened. So Heather, I can't see you on my screen. So if you're there, I will shut up and you can just tell me when to move to the next slide. But
perfect. Yeah, if you just want to go back to the beginning and we'll get started. Awesome. Thank you so much, Janelle. So first of all, I just want to thank my friend, Amy, who we are friends and colleagues. And she, her child actually is the topic for our case study this afternoon. And I'm grateful for her willingness to let us talk a little bit about her child and the challenges she's experiencing. Amy has joined us by phone. And so after I present her case, if there are any questions that the group has that I'm unable to answer, Amy has commented that she's willing to come off mute and answer those questions directly. So again, I'm so grateful to have this opportunity. Next slide. So a little bit about Allie. She's a 5-year-old Caucasian female. She has MAND syndrome. And just a little bit of background about MAND, that is a condition that affects neurological and physical development. And as a result of having MAND, her language skills, so both her expressive language, so her production of speech, and her receptive language, her ability to understand speech, have been compromised. She also experiences feeding problems, and this is a result of having weak muscle tone. In the past, she suffered from constipation, but this has recently been resolved. Allie also has some difficulties falling asleep, and Amy reported that she's currently taking gabapentin and mirtazapine to help with that. She does sleep with a weighted blanket and a pacifier. She did have a sleep study on December 26th, but we don't have the results of that sleep study yet. She's no longer napping. She's sleeping on average about 10 hours in a 24-hour period, and this is on a very good day. She used to experience night terrors, which is common with MAND syndrome. However, since her constipation is resolved, they've noticed that the night terrors are not as frequent. I asked Mom about seizures because that's common with children who have MAND, and Allie has never experienced any seizures. I asked Mom where she sleeps, and she's sleeping in a crib. Next slide. So a little bit about Allie. She lives with her mom and dad and her 2 foster siblings, ages 2 and 5. And the foster siblings moved in just over 4 months ago. I asked a little bit about, how she interacts with her siblings, and Mom reported that Allie enjoys watching them play, that she doesn't seem fazed by sharing caregivers' attention. That was something that I was curious about. She hasn't been impacted at all in sharing her caregivers' attention with 2 other siblings in the home. Parents reported that the kids really love calling her sister. They like to hand her toys, play with her. She is responsive to her foster siblings and their attempts to try to engage and play with her, but she really is communicating that she wants her space. They just completed the evaluations and assessments for a diagnosis of autism, and they are interested in and currently pursuing some therapy, ABA therapy. Allie has a short attention span, again, very common with MAND. She can be distracted or redirected. One of her favorite social games is Pat-A-Cake. She likes her vibrating toys, and Mom mentioned that her favorites were the Vibra Chews, but they're no longer in production, and also the Z-Vibe, and that she prefers to have a toy that is going to vibrate continuously. But the problem with that is the life is very short, right? It's going to run through the batteries. So they'll give her other toys that when she bites, they'll vibrate, but they're a little bit clunky, difficult for her to hold on to. And again, she likes that constant feedback. And so again, she has to, to bite on those toys to get that feedback. And she just prefers to have that constant vibration. They will give her other things to play with. And again, they'll try to do some redirection and distraction, but it's biting that she really prefers to do in her spare time. Next slide. So as I mentioned, parents did report, and I quote, that she prefers biting to doing almost anything else. She generally is very happy. She's a very happy disposition. Parents have tried to add biting to Allie's IEP, but they haven't been successful in getting that added. I asked a little bit about the biting and if that is occurring across environments, and it is. It's happening in the classroom. And I asked a little bit about what the teachers have done, if anything, to try and redirect or distract her, what they have found to be successful. And they have not found anything to be successful long term. So in other words, she'll engage, but the moment that they have to attend to another student, she reverts right back to biting. I asked a little bit about the biting, if they notice that she's biting as a way to communicate, as a way to get her needs and wants met. And they said that they haven't noticed a connection between increased biting and wanting to communicate and using that biting as a way to communicate. Next slide. So they did talk about that they will pad her arms and legs because that's what she tends to want to bite first. And then when her fingers are exposed, she's going to bite at her fingers. And so when they start to look sore and infected, then mom and dad are going to go ahead and tape those fingers. With Allie, she finds a way to get around those pads. So she finds a way to kind of pull those pads back, or finds any exposed area of her body that she can bite. I also asked about kind of going back to that antecedent behavior and consequence. I asked a little bit about when foster siblings moved in, did she notice an increase in biting as Allie was kind of, adjusting to a change in routine, a change in that family dynamic, and there was no patterns that emerged. Mom and dad had a conversation, and they said that they have noticed when biting has intensified, when it has not has been as intense, that they were able to attribute it to her being sick. But they said there's not any patterns that are really emerging. Something that they've done recently is reintroduce the pacifier to try to keep her from biting. They're going to monitor to see if this helps, but of course that was something that they were limiting to the nighttime. And reintroducing that in the daytime, I'm sure that they are interested in some other ideas to try to help with self-soothing rather than reintroducing the pacifier. Next slide. So what are the goals? What do they want some support with? Of course, they want to limit, if ideally eliminate, her engagement in the self-injurious behavior of biting. They're interested in identifying new strategies to combat boredom, some self-soothing techniques, some ways to encourage communication. We talked a little bit about what they have tried, and she said they have tried sign language. It has not been effective. They have tried picture exchange communication system. It has not been effective. They said that she would not indicate what her preference was by being shown pictures. They did have success, however, in holding up objects. And so she will indicate when she does want an object. So she'll choose between two choices. At the school, they're looking into some augmentative communication devices. They have not found any that Allie's really taken to. So until they can find one that's successful, they're not going to be trying things at home with augmentative communication because they want to make certain that what they find can be used across environments for consistency. Mom did tell me that it took extensive time, a ton of practice, but what they did get Allie to start doing is reaching up to indicate, hey, I'm ready to get up for the day. So they have had success with that in leaving her in the crib when she gets up in the morning and kind of sabotaging, if you will, and requiring her to communicate, Mom and Dad, I'm ready to be picked up. But other forms of communication that they've really tried that have been introduced by family, friends, other professionals have fallen flat. Next slide. So some things that they want support from the group. Some strategies and techniques for self-soothing, self-stimulation, engagement, some other things to try to combat the biting, some fresh ideas, some strategies to promote communication. And then of course, if you are aware of any additional community supports or resources that would be helpful to this family, then of course, they're always interested in any ideas that we have as a group of professionals. And I'll, at this point, just ask if there are any questions. And as I mentioned, I'll try and answer. If I'm unable to answer, Amy has agreed to come off mute. And of course, she's the expert on her child. And so we'll together, we'll answer your questions.
Yeah, I have one. I saw where you said that she is approximately like 1 year of age developmentally, but how old is she?
Chronologically?
Yeah.
She's 5.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I might have missed this, but can you go over like her motor movements? Is she pretty in control of motor movements?
So I know that she's not mobile. I asked Mom about that. As far as, you know, where she's at developmentally, Amy, if you're comfortable answering that question.
Or even just like hand movements, arm movements. Is she able to reach? Is she able to grab, you know, point to not point probably, but.
Right. So I know she's reaching up to be picked up. So I know she's able to do that. And I know that she's able to hold on to things. Mom had mentioned that, you know, again, those toys that she would hand that aren't continuously vibrating, but will, you know, there's the sticks that when you chew on them, they'll vibrate, that they're a little bit more clunky and a little more difficult to hold on to. So based on some conversation I've had with Mom, I think, you know, she's getting there. I don't think that her motor movements are refined at all. And again, I know that gross motor wise, you know, that she's not mobile.
Right.
And I don't see Amy coming off mute, so she might be.
That's okay.
She might be trying
to
do that.
About some of the, like you were saying, like the refined motor movements, just to see like if they tried like something with a button or something like that where she can push.
Right. Yeah. And that's a really good question. And I know that they're exploring those, you know, the ACs at school. And they haven't found any that she's really taken to, they've had success with. So I'm going to speculate that they might be trying some of those buttons, and it might be just having those refined movements, kind of that pointing with an isolated index finger and things like that might be a little bit challenging for her.
Okay.
Because they just are still in that exploratory stage and haven't found anything that's successful.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Heather, I just have a quick question about, do you know if she's on any sensory program on a, you know, like throughout the day?
So we actually talked a little bit about that. That was one of the things that I asked, because it's not uncommon for a child with MAND to present as having, you know, symptoms of autism. And that's when we had the conversation that, hey, I'm getting, you know, an official diagnosis. And then they actually did just get the diagnosis in December. And so, you know, they're going to be exploring ABA therapy. So of course, talking a little bit about, you know, her sensory needs, right? And exploring, you know, what might be some options for a sensory diet and some things that we can do there. I know that that's something they're interested in, and something that I'm certain that, you know, they'll explore when they're able to access ABA therapy.
Awesome.
But that's
do you know if she's getting any outpatient therapy?
That's a really good question. So I know that she's getting a lot of services through school. I am not certain if she's getting other services outpatient. That's a really, really good question. But I do know that she's getting a menu of services through the school district.
So then it looks like Michelle has her hand up, and then there's also one question in the chat about how is her eating. So we'll go ahead and let Michelle ask her question, answer that question, and then do breakout groups.
Well, my question was right along with the eating, just wondering about her other oral motor skills. So we know she's a great biter, but what else is she doing with her mouth? Does she enjoy toothbrushing? Is she doing some spoon feeding? Does she have any other mouth games she likes to do, moving her tongue, kind of thinking about that mouth more?
Yeah, so I did ask about eating, but I asked about it in terms of, you know, just her positioning, because she's got low muscle tone. So, you know, what that looks like, how that's working, and then talking a little bit about, you know, her constipation, and, you know, and of course, trying to understand maybe how her eating habits, elimination habits, sleeping habits, how all of that might be impacting her behavior. But in terms of what type of diet, you know, she's taking, and if she's, you know, able to eat by spoon, or if she's still taking formula, or the types of textures of foods that she's eating, I don't have that information. These are such great questions, and I've been communicating back and forth with Mom since, I want to say, the end of October. Kind of felt like an interrogator, and she's been so great to answer all of my questions. but I'm like, oh, I know this great group of professionals are going to come up with more questions that I didn't think to ask. And you're doing that. And I'm kicking myself that I didn't think of all of these great questions that you're asking, because I know it's going to help you to respond. Kirsten.
Yeah, this is just a real simple basic. You talked about the idea of reintroducing the pacifier, but have they tried other substitution, like a chewy tube or just something else that she can bite on that's not herself, that's not going to hurt her?
Yeah, yep. So they have, they have. They've tried, again, those continuous vibrating toys, or just the ones that they can hand her. She'll drop it. She loses interest. Her preferred activity is really just gnawing on herself. Right? Her legs, her arms, her fingers. She really just wants to bite herself. That's the preferred object or person to bite. Yeah.
Okay, I have once again put that she is a 5-year-old with MAND and ASD. I've put the questions in the chat. We are going to go ahead and do breakout groups to be able to answer those questions about self-soothing, biting, as well as some ways to promote communication. So we'll go into our breakout groups for about 20 minutes. So I hope everybody in the breakout groups remember to assign, I didn't give this reminder, to assign a person to talk. And if not, then it just gets to be the hub members. So as soon as everybody gets back in, we'll let everybody share something.
Thank you, Heather.
Bailey, do we have everybody, all the breakout rooms in?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Thank you for doing those breakout groups. As always, the breakout group recommendations will be shared on Canvas and shared out also to the case presenter. So Heather, and then Heather will be able to share it with Amy. But if anybody wants to find out everybody's recommendations, they are shared on the Canvas site. We're going to just go through, because I can see the hub members. I'm going to call on the hub members, and if you have dedicated somebody else to share 1 or 2 things from your breakout sessions, we'll share those. So Kate, you're the first one I see. So I don't know who on your group.
I forgot, so I'll gladly share what we talked about. We really focused a lot on like the biting and the sensory needs that she has. And we talked about a lot of strategies, and we wondered about if there's other ways we can provide her body input versus just focusing on that chewing and that oral input. If there's, ways that we can give input to her limbs and her joints. So we talked about like joint compressions. We don't really know her mobility status, but we thought about like even just being in a stander. So she has that upright like compression to her joints, or putting, going on her hands and knees at times. So she has that input on her hands. Yeah, so those are kind of a few things that we talked about.
Those are great suggestions. Thanks, Kate. All right, Barb, you're the next one I see.
Okay, and we had a similar comment about that. And one thing I think for the communication, something that was also, like Jordan had suggested, do you know what her vision is? So maybe she can't see those smaller items or the pictures or some of those things for the choices. So looking a little closer at some of that. And I think we had a lot of other things, suggestions from, probably come from an OT eval, to see about if there were some other even oral stimulation pieces they could use, of different kinds of food or different kinds of things to eat, to see if that helps. Sorry, my phone's ringing.
Okay, Barb, that puts you off the hook really quickly. All right, Shelby, you're the next group that I see.
All right. We kind of were all over the place talking. We talked about with the biting, is it more of an oral thing or if it might be a sensory thing on the arms, kind of looking at maybe figuring out what that might be. Talked about maybe changing position. So like if she's got some possible frustration with being in the same position, if she stays in the same position. Maybe using some kind of switch toys, like cause and effect toys, to kind of teach that cause and effect that you might need for using some of those AAC devices for communication. Maybe some swimming type things, some water. I don't know if they have like water therapy or something like that, to kind of, you know, water will be all around her for some kind of sensory input. Using some texture balls, looking at the texture of her clothing, and just kind of just all over the place. Acupuncture, massaging or dry brushing to get some of that input into her arms and legs and body. But yeah, that was the gist of it.
Great ideas. All right, Kirsten.
Sounds like we had some kind of similar conversations, in that just we really need to figure out is what is purpose or function is the biting serving for her. So, you know, it may not just be the oral motor, that may help, but the same things that Kate talked about. But really just trying to sort that out and figure that out so that we know which strategies can be the most helpful. And then another idea as well too is I have experience with a child that was biting her tongue really badly, and she went to a couple of different dentists and to try to get like a mouth guard or something. And the first one said that they might have to, and they actually put a sealant on the teeth to make them not as sharp, and so she was doing a lot less damage. And so while that's not really taking care of the behavior, it may help them be able to decrease the amount of damage that she's doing to herself when she is able to get around the padding and whatnot. And then just on the communication, we just had a discussion about really just addressing the foundational and just really those social games and social interactions, and just creating some joy for her and engagement with people, and working on the communication from that at that level, because thinking about where she is developmentally at that, being a year-old developmentally, that we really want to work on those foundational skills. So,
Perfect, great. That idea of seeing a dentist is always helpful too. Kurt, you, I think, are the last group.
So the group was a really good discussion. A lot of the things that have been discussed already. One thing that we did discuss was kind of having a sensory diet, I think is what they call it, or a plant program across the day, so that we don't just address it when she starts biting, but throughout the day, kind of that low level sensory input, so that it doesn't get to the point of biting. So that maybe if there's a way to maintain, you know, just below that threshold where she would start biting. That was one thing that I thought was good suggestion. Also determining whether it's the oral motor or if it's a stimulation. They need sensory, maybe some deep pressure on her hands or something, and that's why she's biting. It's because she feels a need for sensory stimulation on her extremities. With regard to communication, we talked a little bit. There was a program called Every Move Counts, which we think you can do on a Google search, which will take it down to that next level where it's the eye gaze or the turn of the head towards something, one choice over another. And so helping to maybe drop back a little bit on the communication and see if we can establish that basic communication and move forward to more complex as we go.
Great. So each breakout group, if you will remember to send both me and Kate your recommendations so that we can compile those. Kate, will you put in the contact your new DDI email so that all of our hub members have that new one? We'll be compiling those, so they will be shared on, once again, on our Canvas site. So if you have a similar case or you want to just look at those, go ahead and check that Canvas site out. Our next session will be February 2nd at noon. We will be having Brian Talent from the Aurora Mental Health. He's going to be talking to us about some self-resiliency topics in this world that we're having, and some great strategies. So hopefully you guys will join us in February for that. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Be sure to fill out those surveys.
Janelle, did you say to send it to you and Kate?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.